A story cannot be told about a protagonist who doesn't want anything, cannot make decisions whose actions affect no change on any level. Story by Robert McKee. There is nothing worse for a game's story than a silent protagonist. At their best, they contribute nothing to the narrative the game is trying to tell, and at their worst, they actively hinder it. Before we continue, I want to explain what I mean by silent protagonist, as well as state upfront it only really matters for story-driven games, or games where you are playing for the narrative. While characters like Link and Mario are silent protagonists, those are games where the story is purely secondary or even non-existent, that it literally does not matter who or what the protagonist is, just so long as you have something to take through the world. You could replace Mario with a plastic bag and nothing about the games would change. So first off, let's describe what I mean by a silent protagonist. Pretty obvious, right? A protagonist that doesn't speak, or at least we rarely, if ever, see them do so during the runtime of the game. Sometimes they're physically incapable of speech, but most of the time it's implied they can, or even do. We just never get to see it because we are supposed to insert ourselves into their shoes. Think the protagonist in any of the Persona games, or Pokemon, or the Mother series, Chrono Trigger, or honestly, pretty much any JRPG. But even games like Bioshock and Dishonored have silent protagonists. Now, none of these games are bad, with the maybe exception of Persona 3, but that's a different video for a different time. I'm not saying a game can't be good with a silent protagonist. Portal 2 is my favorite game of all time, and its protagonist is the biggest nothing of a silent protagonist that you could have. But that's because Wheatley, GLaDOS, and Cave Johnson can pull Chell's weight for her.
Greetings, friend. I'm Cave Johnson, CEO of Aperture Science.
Indeed, you can have a great game despite having a silent protagonist, but never because of them. And that's the inherent flaw with silent protagonists. They will never improve your game. At their best, they do absolutely nothing for it, and at their worst, they actively make it worse. So, I'm going to start this off with what's probably a hot take, but Joker from Persona 5 is the biggest disappointment I've ever experienced in a video game protagonist. The opening for Persona 5 is so incredible. It starts off and you can instantly tell Joker is this bratty, confident showboat with an amazing design. My first playthrough, I was so excited to play through this 100+ hour game with this kid. Someone so full of personality and flashiness. Hell, he technically isn't even silent in the opening. He says an entire 2 words. But that's just the game lulling me into a false sense of security, because those 2 words are all Joker is going to say for the vast majority of the game. So, spoilers for Persona 5 and Royal here. If you haven't played it, then go do that. The game is real good, even if it's held back by its protagonist, and despite its flaws, I do think it is a great game with a good story, even if Twitter would try to tell you otherwise. Don't worry, I have other games and examples to pull from as well in here, so you're free to skip ahead if you'd like. With that out of the way, let's get into the issues with Joker specifically and why I believe he holds Persona 5 back. The obvious starting point to me is with Shido. Go watch any review of P5 on this site, and without fail, almost everyone will say something along the lines of Shido falls flat, or Shido was disappointing as a villain. But what I find shocking is that people will blame Shido exclusively for it, when the actual issue is Joker. Look at any other villain throughout the game. Every single one has a personal connection or vendetta against at least one of the party members, and those party members in turn all had something to say, or at the very least have some sort of reaction to all the horrible things the villain is being revealed to have done. Yet, when it's Joker's turn up to bat to have his own villain, he has absolutely nothing to say, or even any real reactions of any kind. This is the man that ruined his life, took him away from his family, the reason why everyone at school treated him like garbage, and when it's finally time to take him down and confront him head on, Joker just sits there and says nothing. Instead, I have to watch Ryuji get mad for him, and it just leaves me confused. Why give Joker a villain if Joker himself has nothing to say or any sort of reaction to said villain? And while we're on the topic, can we talk about how difficult it is to really connect to Joker? Like, we're told he lost his friends, his family, and everything from his past life, but we're never shown what his life was like before. We aren't shown what he lost. We don't have a scene where his parents disown him. We never see something like Joker attempting to contact them just for him to get the cold shoulder. We don't see something like him hanging out with his original group of friends to just be ripped away. Nothing like that. As far as I'm concerned, Joker doesn't exist until the night he confronts Shido, and as a result, he actually loses nothing by doing so. Look at every other villain. Kamoshida took Ryuji away from the track team, as well as being the reason Ann's best friend attempted to end her own life. Madarame is abusing and stealing from Yusuke. Kaneshiro is actively blackmailing Makoto and threatening to kidnap both her and her sister for, Futaba is sabotaging her own life, and even Okumura, the weakest villain, is going to sell off his own daughter in order to get a foot in the door in politics. All of these villains are actively ruining the lives of various Phantom Thieves. But what did Shido ruin? Absolutely nothing, because Joker had nothing. Because Atlas thinks we can't insert ourselves into someone's shoes if they, God forbid, have an actual personality and story to tell. And I promise this video isn't just me ripping on Persona 5. I love that game. I truly do. But I have more to say about Joker and why he really doesn't work as a silent protagonist. Like, why is Joker the leader of the Phantom Thieves? I honestly don't understand. What does he do throughout the entire game that is befitting of a leader? He makes no decisions, calls no shots. He is never the one who brings up a single target throughout the entire game. When Morgana has a falling out with the group and Joker, who is supposedly the closest person to him, does absolutely nothing to try and calm him down or settle tensions. There's no epic speeches he gives to rile the troops, readying them for a heist. He never comes up with a game plan. The absolute most he does throughout the entire game that I would classify as leader behavior is when he acts as bait for Akechi and Sai's palace. Makoto should be the leader behind the Phantom Thieves. She comes up with the plans, thinks things through, and does her research, and just overall does more in that position than Joker ever does. Hell, before she joins, unironically, Morgana is a better leader than Joker. He's the one that teaches everyone the ropes, the one that actually calls shots, and the one that comes up with game plans. What does Joker actually do for the thieves? The best thing he offers is his utility and power, but having strength does not a good leader make. The only thing you can maybe argue in Joker's favor is the fact that he does technically decide on everyone's gear for their infiltration. And maybe at the end of the game where he gets the gang back together after they've lost their way, but in a game that takes 100 plus hours to complete, to have 2 moments where Joker actually acts like a leader out of countless moments through the game where others fill that role much better than him is hardly what I'd call astounding leadership. And for my last Persona 5 example, let's go into the Futaba situation. Don't worry, this won't take too long, but in my latest New Game Plus run, I noticed how Makoto, remember her, is the one to attempt to reach out to Futaba the most, the one that is actively trying to break down her walls, and the one that is attempting to actually help her from her awful situation. Yet, for some reason, it's Joker that Futaba gravitates to, despite the fact he did literally nothing but stand there while Makoto was doing all the talking. The only sort of explanation given is that because Futaba contacted you first on your phone via text, which, keep in mind, she did almost all of the typing for, as per usual in Persona 5, that for some reason makes you the closest to her, despite the fact she may as well have been talking to a brick wall? At no point does Joker reach out to her throughout the entire story section. At no point does he do anything to help her other than be there during the heart stealing. But no, because he's the main character, she just trust him the most. It makes absolutely no sense. I think the worst part of all of this is, and why I focused on P5 so much, is that Joker has so much potential as a protagonist. The few times Joker is allowed to be an actual character, like in the opening of the game, are great. They leave me wanting for more. And I wish this guy was just allowed to be the sass master, overdramatic theater kid he was always meant to be. Instead, he just sits there with his hands in his pockets. It's honestly sad that I have to watch the anime in order to get the personality Joker is supposed to have. And to be honest, for as bad as the animation is, Joker's personality, especially in the dub, actually makes that anime worth watching. It honestly depresses me that I can't be that Joker. Of course, Joker is far from the only silent protagonist I have issues with. He's not even the worst example in the Persona franchise. In my opinion, Maya from Persona 2 Eternal Punishment takes that title. And first of all, what the hell is Persona 2? Now that the arbitrary Persona started with 3 joke is out of the way, let's take a second to discuss why Maya is just the worst example of a silent protagonist, and it's not hard to figure out why. It's because, originally, she wasn't. Back in Persona 2 Innocent Sin, the first game of the Persona 2 duology, Maya was a fully fledged character. Now, I'm not going to pretend like she was this amazing, super deep, and thought-provoking character. Considering the cast, she was actually one of the weaker characters, but she was plenty likable, and I can certainly understand the people who say she's their favorite. But then Eternal Punishment rolls around, and now that she's the protagonist, she just forgets how to be a character? Why? What did you add to the game by taking away her personality? Hell, since we're talking about this game that's older than most of the people on this website, let's take a look at Tatsuya. That man had the biggest glow up in all of JRPG history. Namely, he went from being a silent protagonist to an actual character in the second part of the duology. Like, my god, dude. The Tatsuya in Eternal Punishment is so good, it actively makes me upset that he couldn't be a genuine character in Innocent Sin. But let's take a step away from the Persona series and let's look at another game that actively infuriates me. Let's take a look at Mother 3, because Lord knows Nintendo never will.
Come on, Reggie, give us Mother 3! How about this instead?
Well, however you get your mitts on this game, you'll be introduced to Lucas and his family. And this game takes a very interesting approach in that, despite Lucas being the protagonist of the game, you don't take control of him until Chapter 4 of an 8-chapter game. Now, the real interesting thing about Lucas is that before Chapter 4, he is a fully fledged character. He has wants, desires, fears, and is an overall great kid. I'm very invested in his story. Not to spoil anything in the game, I do highly recommend you play it for yourself, but after Lucas is struck with 2 tragedies in his life back to back, and then you're tasked with controlling him throughout the rest of the adventure, he just stops. He never speaks for the rest of the game, and this issue is exclusive to him. The rest of the party, with the exception of the dog, because he's a dog, still speak and interact with the world around them. It is just Lucas that refuses to be a character anymore, and there's no good reason for him to be like this. Like, at least Maya had to wait an entire game before she forgot how to speak, but Lucas just stops in the middle of the same exact game. Now, before we continue, let's take a minute to discuss what a silent protagonist is done quote-unquote right. The best example I can think of is any protagonist from a survival horror game, because admittedly, those games do much better with a silent protagonist. The best example I can give is Subnautica. Part of the reason that world is so unsettling, other than being stuck in an underwater hellscape surrounded by freakishly large, terrifying creatures. Oh god. But the fact that you feel truly alone in this completely alien location helps with the atmosphere. We even have a direct comparison with the sequel to the game, Subnautica Below, which has a voiced protagonist and, in my opinion, is made worse for it because a lot of the tense atmosphere and creepy vibes are lost when you have someone else reacting to all the scary things. It also doesn't help that the protagonist wasn't exactly well written, but let's not dive into a Subnautica review, alright? Or maybe we can talk about the Mario RPGs, like, for example, the very first game in the RPG series with the Legend of the 7 Stars. Now, this is the furthest thing from a narrative-driven game. Let's be honest with ourselves here. It's a basic Mario plot, but with a small twist. Mario, as a silent protagonist, does do some admittedly entertaining things in this entry. Namely, the moments where he has to mime things as other characters in order to express what's happened to someone else. That is genuinely pretty damn funny. It also helps that the story in this game is super basic, so you really don't need a well-written protagonist. I mean, it's not like anyone in your party changes and develops throughout, or like there's actually some super intricate story behind all the happenings in the game. No, it's Mario. It's just Mario. The other few protagonists I can think of that pull off being silent well are what I call mute protagonists. I know that sounds incredibly similar, but the difference is in the details. A mute protagonist, as I describe them, is someone who is physically incapable of speech, but still attempts to express themselves and reacts to the world around them, either through facial expressions or hand signs or any other way they can attempt to communicate. Think Jak from Jak and Daxter, or my personal favorite, Otis from Owlboy. A really charming adventure game that I highly recommend if you like these types of games. In this adventure, you take control of Otis, who is a mute. But unlike other mutes, this is just one part of his character. It is something he struggles with. It is something he is mocked for. And most importantly, it is not his only defining trait. Otis has goals, wants, flaws, dreams, and a backstory. Everything that makes a character what they are, and he just so happens to be unable to talk. It's why I cannot consider him a silent protagonist, because he's an actual character. Now, I know some of the counter arguments in favor of the silent protagonist, such as they're supposed to be self-inserts, because apparently it's impossible to put yourself in someone else's shoes if that person has an actual personality. Like, I understand what people are saying, and maybe this idea would work if I made actual decisions in the game that genuinely affected the story, but I can't think of any game that's come out recently where the decisions you make have actual grand sweeping changes. So in that case, why not let my character be an actual character? And the idea that you can insert yourself into someone else's shoes more if they're just a blank slate is absolutely ludicrous to me. If you have basic empathy, it's not difficult to see through a character's eyes. Like, I have to imagine, what if Kratos from the new God of War games was silent because you need to insert yourself into his shoes? The game would be infinitely worse for it. While I cannot say I have slayed Olympian gods or have a child I am attempting to raise on my own, I can understand trying to be a better man than what you used to be, and how difficult of a struggle that can be. It is because I can see him physically struggle in an attempt to change, to be a better man and a better father, that I can connect with him. Even without the knowledge of what happened in previous titles, you can still emphasize with the struggle Kratos has. Your character doesn't need to be silent to insert yourself into their shoes. They just need to have an understandable goal. One of my favorite things in video games is when a character decides to no longer be a silent protagonist, and the game ends up so much better as a result. One of my favorite examples of this is Corvo from Dishonored's 1 and 2. The first game, he's completely silent, and to be honest, it doesn't bother me much in that game since I'd hardly call it narratively driven, but the fact that Corvo has actual thoughts and feelings in the sequel adds so much to the overall game feel. Suddenly, it actually feels like the character has something to lose, and it's not just save the girl because it's my job, or even how Jak went from silent to
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
God, I love this game. And I think this really emphasizes my main point here and what I really want to get across. A silent protagonist at their best does absolutely nothing for your game, and at their worst, they actively hinder it. Meanwhile, a well-written or even just a likable protagonist will always enhance your game experience. That's not to say having a voiced protagonist is guaranteed to make the game better, especially if they're poorly written, but outside of specific circumstances, like with the survival horror genre example earlier, it's almost always better to have an actual protagonist over not having one at all. After all, would you watch a movie or read a book about a protagonist who truly wanted nothing and never had anything to say about the world around them? If not, then why is it any different for the stories in our games? Hey guys, thank you for watching the video. I truly do appreciate it. I know I've been gone for a while, and to anyone who's watched some of my older content, you might be asking where I've been. Long story short, I went through quite a bit in the past few months, and I was heavily depressed. But I'm trying to get back into video editing now and video making, so this part's going to be kind of rambly, as I just basically explain that. If you want, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It does help, and I did put a lot of work into this, and I am quite proud of all the work I did. I'm trying to also distance myself from D&D with all of the Wizards of the Coast stuff I'm sure you've seen. I'm not going to bring it up here, but I'm trying to distance myself from that and get into other topics that I'm also passionate about. And I just want to know, what are your thoughts? Did it go well? Did you enjoy the topic? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Tell me in the comments below. Feel free to stop by my Twitch or my Twitter as well. You're free to, share your disgruntled thoughts there or whatever it is. And with that, Thanks, guys. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and take care.